Robert, so it starts in 1985. And when do you learn about SSPI?
I learned about SSPI a couple of years before we started running it. We were running another industry association that in satellite and satellite services, and as often happens with nonprofits, it got into a certain amount of trouble. Its business model was kind of wearing out, and so the people who were on the board, contacted me and said, "Listen, we'd like to talk to you." And a couple of years later, we one of my favorite little memories of this actually is the gentleman who hired me and my partner as well. At that time, he was a lawyer, and at that time, he was the chairman of the board of governors of Intelsat. Now, Intelsat was the very first international satellite company. It was still at that point a treaty organization. So it was not a business. It was this amazing consortium of national governments. And so he was the chair, and I got the chair of the board of governors of the most important satellite company in the world to come down to the former office of the place and help me pack boxes. And that's the kind of guy he was. He just dug in and got it done.
Yeah, so that's pretty. It's humble beginnings, right? And so tell us, fast forward to today, how many members and where are they located?
We have about 3,000 odd. It cycles up and down, individual members. And the secret of that is that they, most of them are employees of companies that are our corporate members, that are our supporters. And that's worked out extremely well because, well, first of all, size and scale helps. But in any business or in any nonprofit, you really do have to engage companies with their spending power to help you get the job done. So we've got about 60 odd corporate members, ranging in size from startups that aren't even commercial yet, up to the really well established names like SES, one of the biggest satellite companies in the world, and everybody all up and down the very complex value chain that satellite has grown. And they are everywhere. I mean, we're strongest in North America, not surprisingly, but we have individual members in about 42 nations, and companies in probably, after North America, Europe's probably our second biggest region, followed by Canada probably. I guess North America. I guess we can count Canada in North America, and South America as well.
So. What are some of the other corporate partners or corporate members that you have in addition to SES?
Well, let's see, recognize names. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of operators that are not as well known as they should be, but nonetheless, that's just the way it is. You're embarrassing me now because I'm going to actually just check because I don't want to leave anybody out here. It's a terrible thing when it's like when you're asked to give that speech where you thank people for contributing, and then you leave out the names of some of the most important ones. So some of these are pretty much household names, certainly for your members: Hughes, Network Systems, and EchoStar. Northrop Grumman, OneWeb Satellites is a new player here. Maxar, big satellite manufacturer and also Earth observation company. Planet, one of the best names ever, which is an Earth observation company. Speedcast, Global Star with their phones and messaging devices. CPI is another big one. Airbus, some of the big contractors, Northrop Grumman, Airbus, they're in there as well. The real sort of comers in the whole business are these firms that are not that well known outside, like SAT ADSL, ST Engineering, iDirect, and a little company called Ursa Space that I'm particularly fond of.
So we're on here today with the executive director of SSPI. It's Robert Bell. And if you have a question, just put it in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'll pick it up. We gave Barney Scholl, our general counsel, the night off. He is on his way to a vacation, a well-deserved vacation. So
good for him.
And So, Robert, what is the value proposition of being a member of SSPI? What do the corporate partners and the individual members? What is the value proposition?
Well, there's a couple of them. I mean, one, of course, is that network. So now it's gone from being, a few hundred members to thousands. Obviously, most of them don't meet face to face because this is a global industry. And so we have a lot of online offerings, whether they're regular podcasting we do, or a bunch of other programming that I'll talk about more in a minute. So that's all, there for them. And in addition, the kind of thing that I know that the Radio Club of America must do, which is, your one member wants to connect with one of the companies or individuals in the membership. That's what we're here to do. We're here to steer you to the right place. So that's just the basic blocking and tackling. But the reason that I think we get the support we've been able to get is because of two missions that we undertook. We went through the kind of classic thing that you do from, if you're a nonprofit, you do it every 8 to 10 years, where you go say, oh my God, the market's changed underneath me. What do I do? How do I adapt to it? And it's always a challenging process, but a good one. And we came out of that one with the decision to pursue two missions because we perceived two strategic problems facing this industry. And I'll be interested to see whether your people who are listening to us resonate to them in your own sectors. One of them is the fact that there's a real talent gap. There's a real talent shortage. And in particular, there is in space and satellite, or it's getting better because of guys named Elon and Jeff and Richard, who are now globally famous. But generally speaking, when I talk to young people who are in mechanical engineering or electronic engineering or whatever, any of the disciplines that lead up into a job in this business in the engineering side, and I ask them, what are you going to do when you get out of graduate school? They pretty much have all universally said to me, well, I'm hoping to get a job with NASA, JPL if I'm in the US, or ESA if I'm in Europe. And I look at them and smile and say, well, bless you, I hope you do, but the odds are really, really against you because there just aren't that many of them. But I come from this $400 billion industry that has a real need for talent. And I'd like to tell you about it. And they say, well, what industry is that? And I say, commercial space and satellite, which is actually where all the growth is happening. So that need to get talent in here is really deep. And we do a number of things in that area, ranging from the most basic blocking and tackling. We did some research and discovered that about 30% of our membership were made up of companies, and these are almost all large companies that do a tremendous job at this. They're at colleges and universities recruiting. They have internship programs. They have a whole process they put people through. But that means that 70% of the companies don't really, because they're small, they're mid-sized, they tend to do this thing casually. The industry, because it grew slowly for most of its history, was very comfortable just sort of, poaching from their competitors or hiring their former customers and moving them into the business. And it wasn't a big deal. Now the industry is growing like crazy and the needs for talent are really extreme. So we have a bunch of content basically that instructs these smaller companies, how do you recruit from a university? How do you onboard? How do you do these things? We also work with a set of student groups. These are sort of self-run student organizations of young people who are already crazy about space, but again, because they're in university and they're university professors, for reasons that I still don't understand, for the most part, never touch the commercial sector. And therefore, they don't really know much about it. To basically run competitions and do some other things with them to let them know this industry is here and is looking for them. And it's working, because now when I talk to these young people, I no longer get that I'm going to go work for JPL. It's like, oh, I've already got a job with Momentous Space. Good. So that's something that the industry really wants to support. And it's a real infrastructure. It's a human infrastructure issue, right? Every company's got their own recruiting to do. But in general, how do you make sure that young people in general know about this industry? The other side of what we do, it really relates to that. We started in 2016 a campaign that we call Better Satellite World. And it consists of, I guess at this point, about 31 short videos that tell dramatic human stories about what satellite services do for us here on planet Earth. Because the fact is, and again, if I'm probably preaching to the choir here, the fact is that if you took down all the satellites tomorrow, we'd all be probably starving to death about a week later, because everything in the world runs off some part of this technology. And so that untold story has been a huge strategic gap for this industry, because everybody in the world knows what the mobile phone does because they carry one in their pocket or their handbag.
Right.
They don't know what satellites do. They don't see them. They're thousands of kilometers or tens of thousands of kilometers in the sky. So, absent that awareness, the industry, I mean, this was all brought home to me back in the Obama administration when $900 billion, million dollars was allocated for broadband. And in the original allocation, not one penny went to satellite, in spite of the fact that 25 or 30 million Americans can't get anything but a dial-up connection at that time. So, we decided to start fighting that battle. And because we're a small nonprofit, it's all guerrilla warfare. I call it the poor person's Intel Inside campaign. Intel spent $5 billion on that, by the way, over time. We don't happen to have that. So we're doing it, the hard way. But it really has made a difference already in the way the industry talks about itself. I had the pleasure of hearing the CEO of SES a year ago give a speech about his company. It was a great presentation. The guy's a great speaker, and he had super slides and animations. And he didn't say one word about their fleet, about their technology, or about their money. He just talked about lives. And I thought, yes.
Making a difference.
So to come back to answer your question, finally, the value proposition, there is an individual value that you're going to get. And if you're a company of ours and you're a member, we offer you various ways in which we can help you market yourself within industry in association with what we do. And they like that. So that we give them a justification for supporting us. But what's really attracting them is that we have these big, ambitious missions, and we're just working away at them every day.
Well, I lived through some of the that $900 million investment. I was a WISP, a wireless internet service provider, for 4 years, and was racked up against the satellite providers for internet. And you brought up one of the magic guys in this business. Tell us. What is your expectation with what Elon is going to bring to satellite-based internet services for rural America, which is just so disadvantaged right now?
That is a great question. And I think probably nobody has got the real answer. I'll give you the range of the things that I think will happen or could happen. I mean, one of them, of course, is obviously they've driven out their consumer business first. So they are subsidizing this antenna to a very large degree, which is not a winning proposition for business. They are delivering in their beta phase, tremendous amounts of capacity. There's a colleague of mine who runs another nonprofit in the business who's got it, and he loves it. It's fantastic. And so, as they get their units up, they're going to be able to start getting that antenna. Well, first of all, they're going to start being able to break even on the cost of the antenna, but their intention is obviously to drive that down. So it's a reasonable purchase to make. It's, $75, $100, whatever, just for the hardware. So I think they're going to be very, very successful at that. The problem they face is one that the industry unfortunately created for itself, because it began rolling out internet via satellite a long, long time ago. Mm-hmm. And because of the nature of technology at that point, the industry was out there selling a service that really just wasn't very good because it was highly contested. And so satellite developed this reputation. If you go out into the rural parts of America and you ask people, what about that satellite internet? They'll just look at you like you just spit on the floor. Because it's horrible. They have terrible memories of it. So it's going to take a while for that to change.
Yeah.
Now, long term, there's some interesting problems with the model. And we don't have to worry about this for another 3 to 5 years, but the concerns about the business model are twofold. First of all, these satellites are operating in low Earth orbit, therefore they're passing overhead. And 80% of the time, they're over water. So that's why just last week, I guess it was, or the week before, Starlink announced their business service, because what they need to be able to also serve ships and yachts and some of the folks are over the water. So if you just think about that, that means they've had to spend a huge amount of money putting up a lot of spacecraft, and a lot of the spacecraft are fundamentally idle during too much of their time. The business model works or it doesn't. Elon's goal is not to go bankrupt. Good goal. More interesting long-term is something I just read the other day that really stopped me because I'd never thought of it before, which is a capacity issue. One of the problems that every satellite internet company, including some of the new generation of Hughes Network Systems and Viasat, who have a terrific service. Viasat, both of them win JD Power Awards. It's terrific stuff. But they constantly are contending with the capacity problem because people will always want more in broadband. That's the one thing we know about it.
Yeah.
And so the question is whether, Starlink is going to be able to keep up with that ever rising demand, or whether they too are going to be forced to start throttling people, controlling how much capacity you can get, which we all know is a bad idea. So the jury's out. I mean, the advantage with LEO is at least you've got, these are smaller, cheaper satellites. You can keep iterating them and coming up with better and better technology. But we'll see. That's really the long haul in this.
Yeah, it is the entrepreneur side of Elon, and gosh, he's done so many good things. You would never bet against him, but
exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Right. And but Robert, the technology needs to come up to scale with the vision, and that was the problem. As I was CEO of a wireless internet service provider in rural America, is everybody wanted more, and you can't, the pie, when you start dividing it down, those capacity, and so hopefully he's got the secret sauce. And
well, it's not just him, by the way. I mean, one of the things
right.
that's happened is, in addition to the innovation that's gone up in the sky, the unsung story of the last 10 years has been incredible rates of innovation in the humble modem. Incredible rates of innovation in the ability to do adaptive coding to deal with weather, to basically get that link to be maintained more and more and more and more, and then to be able to just jam more and more and more bits through it. It's unbelievable. There was actually a fun period of about 9 months where two companies were just like dueling with press releases about how they'd just done a 400 megabit circuit, and then somebody else did 500, and then it's 700, and then they stopped because they realized it was stupid. But the miracles really do keep coming. So I am actually hopeful that presuming that the mobile industry leaves the satellite industry with any spectrum, I'm hopeful that this will end up being actually a continuing business. I just think that there's a lot of interesting problems to solve.
There is, and Robert, your SSPI is right in the middle of it, and so we have a couple of questions here, and I want to go through those because I love having the interaction with all our viewers, and we've got a record number of viewers on tonight. Can Robert go through a short history of the space business, starting with Sputnik?
Woo! Oh, a short history of the space business.
This might take Sputnik. A few hours.
Yeah. Well, okay. So first there was Sputnik. And then, okay, a short history of the space business. Well, okay. So for the first, Sputnik was 47. So for the first, let's say 60, yeah, so for the first 20 to 25 years, the space business was government spending big bucks. Of course, we all know about Apollo. And we know about, the Russians and the Chinese doing a lot of investment in this. And so, what was the purpose of it? Well, the purpose of it was, national prominence, was national championship. Space is the next frontier, and we're going to go take it. And that was great because a lot of money got poured into it. We all know the stories of NASA coming up with things that ended up becoming incredibly foundational today. They're the people who started miniaturizing things. Velcro, hey, they invented Velcro.
Yep.
So, that was that story. And then what happened was that some private companies, I think GE was one of the early leaders, decided that it was a business here. And so they built and launched a spacecraft. And that was for US domestic, and similar things that were happening in Europe, domestic audiences, because the law at that time said the nations had gotten together and created Intelsat, the treaty organization. And that was the only organization that was authorized to do international satellite. So you had a monopoly, right? And not only that, but in the US, there was a second level of the monopoly that in order to deal with Intelsat, you couldn't deal with them directly. You had to go to an organization called ComSat, which was their prime contractor, which in turn would get you spectrum, transponder availability from Intelsat. Okay, so the kind of picture it's hard to imagine anymore. So more and more satellites went up. It turned out to be a pretty, decent business. You had to spend a lot of money to get up there, but once you got it up there, there was a lot of service demand, and the initial service demand all came out of the broadcast industry, because I think it was HBO who did it first. The people who suddenly figured out that you could, it was PBS. PBS did it first. Realized that getting their signal to their affiliates over long lines, as AT&T was, the AT&T business was called then, was expensive, incredibly expensive, and that they could do better because of the topology of satellite. Whenever you send video over a terrestrial circuit, you have to send it multiple times to multiple destinations. The great thing about satellite is that you send it up, you put it up once and it comes down and everybody gets it at the same time. So that one-to-many advantage was the foundation of the success of satellite for the next 20 years. It became ubiquitous in broadcast. HBO is famous for being the first cable company to use it. All the networks moved into it and went on, and it just took the world by storm. And there's still plenty of parts of the world where that's still an enormously strong business proposition. So life was good, and it was a great business if you were in a satellite operator, because you nailed up your satellite and then you just charged for it for the next 15 years. And somebody, I can't remember who it was, invented what was called the cable neighborhood. I think it was Utelsat. And it's a simple idea once you think about it. It's being a landlord in space. If you're running a cable network and you're a cable company and you have, I'm sorry, let me put it a different way. You're HBO and you're a programmer and you're selling your programming to hundreds of cable systems. Well, they all have to get that programming from somewhere. And if you're up on 12 different satellites, they're all pointing different places and so forth. But if you put it all up on one satellite or two satellites in this one specific area of the sky, everybody's life gets easier. And and the value of that slot in the sky just has tripled or gone up multiple times. So, landlords in space being very successful. Okay, so it was a very stable business, great cash flow, very sleepy, slow rates of innovation, because if you're running a carriage trade business, you don't have much motivation to innovate. That began to change seriously when digitization came in, when we began first to digitize video, and then we began doing more digitization and multiplexing of voice, and then this thing, then all of a sudden we were doing ISDN and data communications, and of course along came the internet. And the internet really blew the top off of this. You had companies getting started doing satellite backbone delivery of internet to places that couldn't get it any other way. So, if you go dropping in the Caribbean islands into South America, into Africa, business got more competitive because there was such demand for this. That's when you begin to get the miracle of, well, how do we push more bits through these pipes and while keeping the quality of service high. And so then you began to get this kind of nice rate of innovation. Still not incredible, but you had VSAT come along, and Maritime, guy who's in our Hall of Fame, invented the motion stabilized antenna. That is how ships get their service. And then all of a sudden, and I wish I've been trying to come up with the date when it happened, but all of a sudden, the investment community, just in a small way to begin with, the private investment community began to look at this industry and say, this is a really, really interesting industry. And the first reason that they liked it was because it was extremely stable and cash rich. And so they said, this is great. It offsets some of my risky investments. I'm going to buy this company, and they'll do things to it like load it up with debt, but that's a whole other question. And again, that attracted more and more. And this began to kick off this amazing set of innovations. So you had a guy named Greg Weiler, who had been frustrated trying to deliver terrestrial services in Africa with a company he had, decided that he would start a satellite network called the Other 3 Billion, O3B. And he, by gosh, raised $3 billion to do it. And O3B eventually didn't quite make it. It went bankrupt before it could cross the finish line, but they were bought out of bankruptcy, and they now have 60% of their network up, with the rest, with the start of service later this year. And then, of course, Elon, I guess I don't need to go into all the details, but what happened was this wave of entrepreneurs funded by really, really huge amounts of capital began coming into this market. And when that happens, the rate of innovation has just gone through the roof. Now, we know that a significant number of the companies that have been founded to do all that are not going to make it, because they just can't. There's not a big enough market. But what they're generating is so incredibly exciting that it's worthwhile. It puts me in mind of in the dot-com crash, companies which had put up, had built huge amounts of fiber under the oceans and between cities and so forth, all went bust. And one wit I read summed it up as a $6 trillion gift from American shareholders to the rest of the world.
Well, there's a price to be paid for all this.
There's always a price to be paid.
And so, Robert, we have some more questions here, and I want to get through them all. Can Mr. Bell talk about the difficulty of operating in an environment with international rivalries? And you were kind of talking about that just now.
With international rivalries, well, every market has got really, really intense rivalries. They don't always come with armies, but they're still pretty intense. This is one of those areas where, for the most part, the world has agreed to get along, because if when the satellite business, we're talking about a few things. We're talking about landing rights. Every nation has the right to control who lands a satellite signal in its property and who transmits out of it. We're also talking about, unfortunately, we're talking about the issue of space debris, because every country that launches, and there's a small number, it's about 20 countries that have any kind of launch capability, is legally responsible for the debris that they leave in space. Now, there's zero enforcement for that, but nonetheless, it's an issue. So when the Russians or the Chinese blow up something in orbit and create a huge debris cloud, everybody hates it, but it's, they're not going to clean it up, but they should. And lastly, it's all governed by this Outer Space Treaty, which basically says there's not going to be any, weapons in space. And I was just thinking about this the other day, thinking, I bet you there are right now. But so, in a world in contention, so far we've been smart enough to not ruin the commons, right? So generally speaking, the International Telecommunications Union sets the rules, and people generally follow them, because to be cut off from communications is just too high a price to pay for anybody. Exceptions to the rule, some nations are more protective of what they consider to be strategic industries or industries that involve national security. than others. The US is quite protective of it, but we still are an open market. India is one that's very protective of its own companies, so they've made it fairly hard for international players to work there. That's opened up a little bit, but still not much. In China, it is an absolute national, the Chinese government is going to take care of that. Thank you very much. Similarly, Russia similarly has rules like that. So I guess this is a good news story at a time of intense rivalry and partisanship, that this is an area where people have agreed to get along because the consequences of not doing it are just too dire.
Well, yeah. And Neil goes on to say the landmines of ordinary commercial rivalries among corporate sponsors are fairly well understood. Yes. I wonder if there are special considerations in business where so much depends upon the grant of a license, which might be withheld or given to a competitor on basis other than merit. And I think you covered some of those issues as well.
Licensing seems to be pretty transparent. I mean, again, it varies because licensing is complicated. There's the international, there's a license for an orbital slot, which is controlled. I'm talking about a geosynchronous orbit, but anyway, the ITU has certain powers, but a lot of it is done by the nation. So the FAA is in the business of authorizing you to put up a satellite as well.
Right.
But the only point I wanted to make about this was, and I'm going to go, I can tell that my mind's going to go blank just as I'm trying to make this really great point. So why don't you go ahead and just finish the question?
Well, we have several others here, Robert, and Lucen from Oklahoma City says, with Elon Musk's Starlink filling the skies with satellites, and how many satellites is he putting up, Robert? Is it like 3,000? Oh,
it's more than that. He's got a license. He's got an authorization for a lot more than that. I mean, two new networks, Telesats and somebody else's, have been authorized for 30,000.
30,000.
Now, they're never going to put them up there, but it's okay.
And it says, is there a point of critical mass with conflicting orbits and collisions? And, I mean, how much is too much?
We are having a great natural experiment to find out. I mean, clearly, one of the really good things that's happening right now is the issue of space debris has been around since we started, carelessly leaving pieces of the Gemini and Gina rockets in space. But it's starting to be taken seriously. In fact, you now have companies getting started. Astroscale is a Japanese-owned company that's gotten funded to develop a bunch of solutions. And there's government-funded experiments going on in a lot of different places. And how do you stop creating more of this stuff, which is largely a matter of rules? And then B, how do you get rid of the most dangerous parts, the dangerous things up there? So yeah, there's a lot of concern about this. I mean, I've seen charts that show the incidence of debris at different altitudes, and most of it is clustered in low Earth orbit, so 200 to 800 kilometers above the Earth. And if you just think about that picture, you're potentially denying yourself access to space, because if you clutter that up bad enough, you can't get through it. And so the universe is out there, you just can't get to it. Is it going to get that bad? Don't think so. But we're already seeing a lot of adaptation. I'm going to give you an example, something that shocked me the first time I heard it. A lot of the spacecraft, the small spacecraft, small sats being put up into low Earth orbit, don't have any propulsion or maneuvering capability. They're just up there. And some of them have some very clever maneuvering capability, including, there's one, I think it's Planet, for some of its spacecraft uses actually atmospheric drag. They got flywheels that let them rotate the thing, and so that they get more drag in certain positions than others. But that is very quickly being discussed as no, you cannot put anything into orbit without the ability to maneuver it. So those are the kinds of adaptations we're going to see. We're also seeing a lot of cooperation on the tracking front. For a long time in North America, the United States Air Force has basically been the people who track stuff. and they track it to they track things down to a certain size, but it's below that size. There's a lot of junk up there that could still poke a hole in anything. Well, since then, the industry has created its own organization, and the Air Force has joined, has agreed to share data with it, and you're starting to get this global tracking of the stuff, and solving every problem starts with when you actually image it and find out how big it is. So I'm hopeful that we're going to deal with that. In terms of the new constellations, don't know. I don't know if we're going to not know that it's too much only when something bad, a couple of bad conjunctions happen, as they're called, and then we'll have to solve that problem, or whether we'll be smart enough to avoid it going forward. One of the nice things about this industry is it's got a lot of really smart people in it, and for the most part, they do cooperate with each other. It's actually, I warn people people who are entering this industry for the first time, I said, I got some good, bad news for you. The good news is that you're working in a really terrific industry with a lot of great people, but the bad news is I've only in my entire career met one person who managed to leave it. It's just, when you work in it, it's just so interesting that you go, you may go to some other industry, but you always end up back in it because it's just got this magic to it.
You talked about attracting college graduates, whether they be in computer science or electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and that a lot of them don't even consider, space as other than the sexy JPL, NASA, that kind of thing. But one of the questions here is, how successful has your awards program been for the younger people? You have an awards program, and can you talk about that?
Well, I think you're talking about what we call the 20 under 35.
Yes.
And we started this a few years ago for the specific reason. Well, the story that gave it its birth was a guy who was complaining to me at a trade show that we were both attending. And he said, look around here. Well, our industry is dying. Everybody has got gray hair here. Everybody's old. We're dying. And I looked at him and I said, well, because we had just done a survey of our membership about the age ranges, and what we saw was, yes, there's a bulge in the 45 plus zone, but there's a lot of employment, And I said, oh, let me just ask you a question. At your company, how many people under the age of 30 do you think you send to this show? He said, well, none, actually. I said, really? You send there's a trade show. You send your closers here, right? You send your engineers and your sales closers. That's who you send. So we decided that it was time to create a high level recognition for young people. And so we started this thing, and we actually started as a much smaller award program for just 3 finalists until the light bulb went on overhead and said more is better. So we made it to 20 under 35, and we've just been thrilled with the response. First of all, the first year we barely were able to cross that line of 20, but now we're getting 60, 70, 80 nominations a year. And we've got now cohorts of people who've been through this, and we keep them connected. And how do you measure the impact? I don't know, except that it's created relationships in our business that wouldn't have existed before. And I know it's gotten people jobs, because I'll meet some young person whom we put into this, this cohort 3 years ago, and they're working for a different company in a much higher level job. It's like, okay. So, but most importantly, I think it just opens the eyes of an industry to the fact that there is all this talent. And if you're not doing something with it, you're a fool.
And these are very good paying jobs too.
Oh, yeah. Yes. This industry pays quite well. Yes.
So, I mean, this is, it may be one of the best kept secrets, and certainly SSPI is all about, trying to get more people involved. Talk about, Robert, if you would, kind of the global mission and what your mission statement is, and how people can find out more information about what you're doing, what your initiative is, and how they can get involved.
Well, our mission is very much to make this industry, as not even visible is the right word, to give this industry the kind of recognition that it needs to, first of all, accomplish what it can do for the planet, but also, of course, to support the companies that are doing such miraculous things every day. And the only way we're going to succeed at that mission is, in addition to whatever promotional effort, we call ourselves the evangelists. I'm just the evangelist for the satellite industry. But if we're not filling that talent gap, is critical to that success, but also it's the way in which you're going to, the fact that you're making that industry more famous is how you're going to get the talent. There's a self-reinforcing loop there. And again, when you're operating on the scale that nonprofits like ours and yours operate on, you have to have a lot of patience, and yet you can see it happening. You can see it happening. So, I mean, that's the global mission. I'm sorry, the rest of the question you had, what was the second half of your question?
Well, it was surrounding your awards program, and the fact that you said, originally it was tough to get 20. Now you've got 70 or 80. And, where do you take it from there?
Oh no, wait a minute. It's too early to start asking that question, what we do next. Well, interestingly, what we're trying to do, interestingly enough, is because we're aware that the things that we're doing are working. The question is, how do you do more with, the same resources? And so we've taken to really becoming kind of a little broadcasting network. I mean, we do have a weekly podcast. Through this Better Satellite World Series, we're putting out 6, 7, 8, new videos a year and promoting the living daylights out of them, as well as the companies in our industry promoting them. And we publish a digital magazine and, yada, webinars and yada, yada. And one of the things we're doing right now, actually, we're in the last couple of weeks of this, is we're taking all that and gathering it together around issues. So right now we're doing a campaign called Climate Sense. And if you just go to our website, and you'll see Climate Sense. And our website is sspi.org, nice and easy. And what we're doing basically is talking about all the ways in which this industry has anything to do with the battle against climate change, whether from, first of all, understanding it, and then second of all, contributing to solutions to it. And it's, when you lift that rock and start digging, you discover this amazing richness of content of things that industry is doing. And so we're going to do the same thing for our next campaign is going to be called Opening the Final Frontier. And it's all about a low-cost launch as pioneered by Mr. Musk and now imitated by everybody else, and space debris, right? You got to have cheap launch, and you got to be able to get into space without getting hit by a piece of rock moving at God's own speed. And so again, you bring together all of the stories that are there, and then you find ways to deliver them in multiple different means, so that you get heard. And again, without Intel's marketing budget.
Well, we have another question for you, Robert, and sspi.org, very important takeaway here tonight. If you want to learn more about Robert's team and his work. Will space telescopes make Earth-based telescopes old school technology?
That's a really great question. I've never even heard that question asked before. So I'm going to give you a very inexpert opinion, because I am not an astronomer, or for that matter, an engineer. I would say no, and for one very simple reason. It costs so bloody much to put them up. I just have 2 words for you: James Webb. Okay, it's billions and billions over budget. That's how big projects are, right? So there's a similar thing, actually. There's a very similar thing, which is about space-based solar power. It's been talked about since the 70s. In fact, there's brilliant designs for these massive space stations with solar, I can't remember if they were doing solar cells or heat-based stuff, that would then beam the power to Earth via microwave, right? And it's been looked at time and time and time again. A few years ago, we did a competition with a student organization called the Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. here in the US. And we had, I don't know, a dozen teams all working on the project. The project was research space solar power, give it a fresh look, and come and tell us in your report whether you think this is workable. And every single team, they had these brilliant designs and all kinds of crazy ideas, some of them. But at the end of the day, they all said, no, because you could never, ever make money from it. It just caught, I mean, never is a long time, right? If we're all living in the world of The Expanse, one of my favorite sci-fi things, okay, maybe then, because we're already in space, we've already got all the capacity to manufacture up there, but not anytime soon. So no, I think we're going to be looking at the stars with our telescopes for a long time. How many of them will be optical is another question, because the things that are being done with radar and other sensors is just remarkable today.
Well, so, Robert, we're getting close to the end here, but I want to know, what is your vision for the future for SSPI? What things are on your to-do list? What are you thinking about?
You want to know the future. I don't know the future very well. I get to be my age, you stop thinking so much about the future. I think this organization it's funny. This organization, like all nonprofits, is held together in part by its activities, by what it does, of course, by its members and so forth. But it's also held together by its spirit. My membership director likes to say, fortunately not usually in public, people love SSPI, and that's why they join. And I look at her, it's like, okay, let me figure out how to sell that. But it's true. And so if I could try to create one thing for this organization, it would be to find more and more ways to deliver that experience to people who can't be here, right? I mean, years ago, we used to put on an event in Washington around the industry's biggest show. And it started out as a dinner dance in 1987 with 50 people. Well, it grew into this monster event with 1,000 people there for drinks and dinner. And it was a nightmare. I mean, nobody really wanted to go to a 1,000-person dinner. Who would want to do that, right? But there it was, and it was the thing to do. And so, but the feeling people had from doing that, I wish I could reproduce it. I mean, not the part where I don't want to be with these 1,000 people, but just the sense that we're all in this together, that there's this camaraderie, and yeah, I've got a competitive problem with you and you've got one with me, or I'm over in a corner doing a business deal. I always used to love to look across the dinner table and see across the room and see two CEOs head to head over here going, okay, well, I wonder when that announcement's going to come out. But I wish it'd find more and more ways to remotely create that. The COVID has taught us a lot of lessons. It's taught us a lot about what we can do through this kind of medium we have here and things like it. And we're actually starting to work really hard on trying to figure out how can you do that so you can bring more and more of that feeling of fellowship, which ultimately drives engagement, which then drives results, to people that we can only see maybe once a year or once every 2 or 3 years. That's the magic. That's how I'd like to start.
That is the real magic. You're absolutely right, Robert. I think back to the Radio Club of America's banquets at the New York Athletic Club.
All right,
where the Heisman is awarded, and how fortunate we were to be there. And those exact conversations that you were talking about between CEOs in the corner were going on there. And that networking is so valuable and so important. And that is part of the value proposition of being a member of RCA. And, I got to stand and have my photo taken with Marty Cooper, the guy that invented the handheld cell phone. And, I wouldn't be in the position I'm in now if it hadn't been for cellular telephone. And Robert, this has just been fascinating here this evening. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our members have learned a lot about, just how impactful satellites are and what SSPI is doing. And I want to make sure that you get to leave with a final statement on what you want the RCA members to know about your organization and about your commitment.
Well, actually, I'm going to talk about Spectrum because that's your business. And the satellite industry has been in a tooth and nail battle with the mobile industry for now a decade over Spectrum, because it has long, basically owned, if you can own such things, most of the C-band, because it's great for satellite communications. Rain doesn't phase it. It got good penetration and all those wonderful things. And year by year at the WRC meetings, the satellite kept losing because mobile's got a whole lot more money and is a whole lot more effective advocate for its case than the satellite industry was. And then a couple of years ago, first Intelsat and then the other major providers of satellite service suddenly said, you know what? We can make this work. We don't need as much C-band as we thought we had. We're going to sell it, actually. So they made a lot of money doing it. But the reason I'm telling the story is that Spectrum is everything. I mean, all the cool stuff about satellite is wonderful, but unless things are communicating with things, and I'm talking about every single aspect of this business, nothing happens. And so, the folks who are working the problem of radio communications and all of its incredible extensions are really so fundamental to the business that I'm privileged to work in. So that was kind of why this relationship between SSPI and RCA got started, because it's a really natural fit. And I'm sure that some of your members work in parts of this business. Others, are just welcome to cheer on from the sidelines as we try to do the best with the spectrum that we have.
Well, it is an incredible resource, and how it's used. I think you put it very well. And I would be remiss, Robert, if I didn't tell you that back when I was 11 years old, a young ham, or an older ham, took this young wannabe ham. His name was Bob Bell. And,
it is my last name. It turns out is one of the 100 most common names in America. So,
and if it wasn't for him giving my novice test, I mean, we're not being too hammy here, John. We're just, every time I saw Robert here through all our communications leading up to this great event, I thought about my mentor, K3SAN.
Ham radio, you probably know this. Ham radio was instrumental in the very earliest days of satellite communications.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was just
the Oscars.
If the ham radio operators hadn't been there, you just would have had this real dearth of activity. But they sort of created the buzz that made it work. So
yeah, and that buzz still lives today.
I know.
There's lots of amateur radio satellites. So that's a whole nother discussion. Robert, thank you so much for spending time with us this evening. It's been great, and I can't wait to meet you in person.
Well, Sam, there's a lot of people in this world that I can't wait to meet in person again. So we'll add it to the list. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much to all of you for watching. Make sure you renew your memberships to RCA so that you can continue to get these interview series. And thanks so much to John Fasella for his leadership as the RCA president, and to Amy Beckham, our executive secretary. And we'll see you next month for the networking series. Until then, good night from RCA.
And good night all. Thank you for listening.
Go ahead and close the meeting because you're the host.
I guess I am the host. Well, so long, everybody.